His hands were still shaking when the siren stopped. He had been the one wearing the badge, but now he was the one in handcuffs. The cold metal bit into his skin as his heart raced, not from guilt but disbelief. Around him, no one spoke. No one met his eyes. Just moments ago, he'd been protecting a stranger. Now, he was the suspect. He had trained for years to serve with honor, to wear that uniform with pride. But in that moment, all they saw was the color of his skin. And what happened next? It didn't just change his life. It changed how an entire town saw justice. Have you ever been judged before anyone knew your story? Tell us in the comments. Before we begin, hit subscribe. It's appreciated. It was just another warm morning in the small town of Brookside. The streets were waking up slowly. The sound of kids laughing on their way to school. The smell of coffee drifting out from the corner cafe. Officer Marcus Reed buttoned up his uniform, looking at himself in the mirror. The shiny new badge still felt strange on his chest. He was proud, nervous, and hopeful all at once. Marcus was the youngest officer on the force and the only black one. Growing up, he had dreamed of becoming the kind of cop who made people feel safe. His mother always said, "Be the light, baby, even when the world gets dark." Those words stayed with him every day. But sometimes, that light felt hard to hold on to. At the station, Marcus smiled at his fellow officers, but the smiles didn't always come back. Some were polite, others distant. He told himself it was just because he was new. Still, there were moments, small, quiet moments, when he felt the air shift. A comment that wasn't really a joke, a look that lasted a little too long. He'd brush it off, convincing himself that respect would come with time. That morning, he was assigned to patrol with Sergeant Miller, a man known for his strict ways and cold eyes. Marcus admired his discipline, even if Miller rarely spoke more than a few words to him. Together, they drove through familiar streets, the old grocery store, the playground where Marcus once played as a kid, the church that still rang its bells every Sunday. But beneath that calm surface, something uneasy stirred in the air. A call would soon come through the radio, one that would test everything Marcus believed about justice, brotherhood, and himself. Because sometimes it's not the streets that are dangerous. It's the silence inside the system. If you were in his place, what would you have done? Tell us in the comments. The call came in just after noon. A report of a man acting suspiciously near a closed store. Nothing urgent, just routine. Marcus and Sergeant Miller pulled up, the heat pressing through the car windows. Marcus stepped out first, calm and steady, hand resting near his belt but not on it. A man stood near the store door. Tired eyes, worn clothes, hands up before anyone even asked. He looked scared, not dangerous. Marcus felt something in his chest twist. He spoke gently, telling him everything was okay. The man said he was just waiting for a ride, but Miller's voice cut through, sharp and suspicious. Marcus saw the fear in the man's eyes grow. The same kind of fear Marcus knew too well. The fear of not being believed. He tried to explain to Miller quietly that there didn't seem to be a threat, but the sergeant didn't listen. He moved in fast, hand on his gun. Marcus stepped between them for a second, not to challenge, but to calm things down. That tiny moment changed everything. Later, the reports would twist it. They'd say Marcus interfered, that he questioned a senior officer. But in that second, all he had done was try to protect a man from being treated like a criminal for standing still. The tension thickened. People gathered with their phones. And when backup arrived, the scene looked different than it had begun. Marcus stood beside the man, trying to explain, but no one wanted to hear him. Orders were shouted, and suddenly someone said the words that froze his blood. "Get him down!" He looked around, confused. Me? It happened fast, hands grabbing him, voices yelling, the weight of confusion pressing him into the ground. He couldn't breathe for a moment. The same badge that was supposed to protect him now felt meaningless. He tried to tell them who he was, but they didn't listen. His skin spoke louder than his words. When they finally realized the mistake, the silence was heavy. Miller's face was pale, his voice tight with something that wasn't quite apology. Marcus sat on the curb, wrists sore from the cuffs. staring at the uniform that now felt like a stranger's. In that still moment, he understood something painful. That wearing the badge didn't always mean you were safe, even from those who wore it too. He went home that night without saying a word. His mother's porch light was on, just like it always had been. She saw his eyes before she saw the bruises, and she knew. For days after, he showed up to work, quiet but steady. People looked at him differently, some with pity, some with guilt, a few with shame they didn't speak of. He carried on, because that's what strength looked like. But deep down, a question kept echoing inside him. How do you protect others when no one protects you? And though the world moved on, Marcus couldn't. Not yet, because something inside him was beginning to change, not in anger, but in understanding. Have you ever carried pain in silence, hoping one day someone would truly see you? Tell us in the comments. The morning after the incident, Marcus stood alone in the locker room. The hum of the fluorescent light was the only sound. His badge sat in his hand, cold and heavy. He turned it over slowly, watching his reflection curve in the metal, a reflection that no longer looked the same. The chief called him in. Words like misunderstanding and procedure floated through the air, but none of them touched what Marcus felt inside. They said they'd clear his record, that it was all just confusion. But confusion doesn't leave bruises. Confusion doesn't live in your chest, making you question your worth. He nodded quietly, but his mind was far away, replaying the moment when the cuffs locked around his wrists, when he saw the faces of his fellow officers filled with something he couldn't name. Fear? Bias? Habit? Maybe all three. That evening, he sat in his car outside the same store where it had all happened. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold and orange. He saw the man again, the one they'd accused, helping an old woman cross the street. They met eyes for a second. No words. Just a quiet understanding between two people who had both been unseen in different ways. And right then, something shifted inside Marcus. He realized he couldn't change the way people saw him overnight, but he could change what he stood for. He could be the kind of cop his mother had raised him to be, one who listened, one who didn't look away. He walked into the precinct the next day, heart pounding but head high. When Miller saw him, their eyes met for the first time since that day. No words were spoken, but for once, Miller didn't look through him. He looked at him. That single glance, filled with quiet shame and something like respect, told Marcus everything. Change didn't start with speeches or protests. It started in small human moments where hearts cracked open just enough to let truth in. What would you have done if this truth was suddenly staring back at you? Tell us in the comments. Days turned into weeks and life slowly found its rhythm again, at least on the surface. But for Marcus, nothing was the same. He still wore the same uniform, walked the same streets, heard the same radio calls. Yet every sound, every look, carried new meaning now. He had seen something that couldn't be unseen. The cracks in a system he had once trusted completely. At first, the weight of it made him quiet. But silence no longer felt safe. It felt like agreeing with what was wrong. So Marcus started small. He began visiting schools, talking to kids about trust, about courage, about how strength doesn't come from power, it comes from kindness. He spoke from the heart, not as a cop, but as a man who understood what it felt like to be judged before being known. Some people listened, some didn't, but he kept showing up anyway. One day, the same man he had tried to protect showed up at one of those talks. He sat in the back, listening quietly. When it ended, he walked up and shook Marcus's hand. No words were needed. That one moment said everything. Back at the station, things began to shift in small ways. Miller stopped using certain jokes. The chief began encouraging more community talks. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Marcus realized that change doesn't come in big waves. It comes in ripples made by those brave enough to keep showing up. One evening, as he locked up his patrol car, a little boy ran up to him and said, "I want to be like you one day." Marcus smiled, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Be better," he said softly. "Be kinder." As he walked away, he felt a quiet peace, not because everything was fixed, but because he had found his purpose again. The world still had a long way to go, but maybe, just maybe, hearts were beginning to open. He looked up at the night sky, the stars faint but steady, and for the first time in a long while he felt seen, not as a color, not as a badge, but as a man trying to do good. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Tell us in the comments. Show some love with a like and subscribe to stay inspired.